However, I do want to talk about this and tease out some nuance here. You guys might not like my answer to this. This might be an unpopular opinion, but... Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name's Mickey. I'm a therapist, and we talk about therapist-y things on this channel. Today, we are talking about man therapy. This is something that my Discord brought to my attention. Actually, shout out to all of my friends in the Discord. If you want to join that, there's a link to my Patreon below, which is how you get access to that. But someone posted a screenshot of an ad for man therapy, and they were just sort of talking about like the issues with the way that this is being advertised and like the gender roles and all that stuff. So I want to get into that and talk about that a little bit today. First, I want to give you guys like a summary generally of what man therapy is and kind of explain what we're doing in case you're not familiar. While I'm pulling up my notes for this, by the way, if you're new here, hi, thanks for coming. You should subscribe. Thanks. So man therapy is described as like by the parent company as leveraging humor to promote men's mental health across the globe. And generally it's a landing place. It's like a health initiative built around the idea of trying to encourage men or like traditionally masculine men to go to therapy. I'm going to play you guys a little bit of the intro video right now, actually, so you can kind of see. I think they explain it more succinctly than I probably will. So let's watch that.
Did you know that men have feelings too? No, not just the hippies. All of us. Hello, I'm Dr. Rich Mahogany. Welcome to Man Therapy. Go ahead. This is your time. Click one of the buttons above to continue. Are there buttons? They said there were going to be buttons.
Okay, so I think it's clear a lot of the advertising and media that they have on their website and stuff like that is themed in this same kind of way. I saw, I think, a New York Times write-up about it, that they referred to man therapy as like the fictitious therapist that they have as their mascot. His name is Dr. Rich Mahogany. He is like a mashup of like Ron Swanson and Will Ferrell's character in Anchorman and Dr. Phil. That's like sort of the vibe that they're going for. And I think it's all pretty clear that it's intended to be like viewed with humor. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about the parent company and all of that stuff before we get into it, because as we know, companies in the digital space that claim to promote mental health awareness and healing can sometimes have nefarious intentions. And so I wanted to talk about who owns the company, what are their goals, that kind of stuff before we dissect the material specifically. So Man Therapy is owned by Grit Digital Health and Cactus Inc. It's co-owned by these two organizations. Grit Digital Health has a variety of different public health programs or like health initiatives, including a program called You, and they have like different sects of this or like different offshoots of this program. So there's You, and then in parentheses at college, You at work, I think, and like other sort of like niche groups that they tailor this material to. Yeah, and a variety of other programs, but a lot of the material that they produce is particularly centered around decreasing risk for suicidality and improving people's mental health and those types of things. They have like kind of a focus on creating mental health programs, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Cactus Inc. is just like straight up a digital promotion company. They create like digital media and stuff for companies, and they partnered with like some bigger companies. I don't know why it like really matters because they're very like upfront about the fact that they're co-owned by Cactus Inc. I don't know why they're so forward with that, because it doesn't seem like Cactus Inc. really does all that much in my opinion. But for the sake of transparency, it's co-owned by these two companies. But before we get into that, I want to give a shout out to this week's sponsor, Green Chef. Green Chef is a CCOF certified organic meal kit company, and look at me. Look how excited I was to open my box this week. I am a hard to impress person with food, but Green Chef consistently blows me away with their meals. These are all the meals that we got this time, and you guys know that I'm a big fan of variety, which is why I love Green Chef so much, because they're easy to follow. Recipes change every week, which means you're discovering new stuff all the time. This week, Erin and I tried Parmesan crusted chicken, and you guys, I really cannot overstate, first of all, how easy the recipes are to follow, but second of all, how convenient the doorstep delivery is, because not having to go to the grocery store meant that we actually got to sit down for a wonderful and delicious meal together on a weeknight, which is rare. I also love how organic and sustainable Green Chef is. They're the only meal kit that's both plastic and carbon offset, and so for that, they will forever have my heart, in addition to the fact that these green beans were delicious. Green Chef has options for every lifestyle, including vegan and vegetarian and Mediterranean and gluten-free, which I really love, because while we do eat meat, we also incorporate plant-based food into our life, and I've yet to try somewhere that does both as well as Green Chef does. Last time we loved our vegetarian food, and clearly this was a hit also.
2 for 2.
like I literally did a happy dance while we were eating this meal. If you want to do your own happy dance, Green Chef is hooking it up. You can use my code MickeyAtkins60 to get 60% off plus free shipping. So go to greenchef.com for more details. Thank you again to Green Chef for sponsoring this week's video. Now let's go ahead and hop back in. Okay, so like we talked about, Grit Digital Health has a number of different programs, including the U, but also one called NOD. They're all aimed at improving the mental health of the users and sort of like fighting stigma and those types of things. They utilize a variety of different types of media to advertise these programs, but something that I thought was of note in looking at their website and trying to dissect like what is this company's ethos, like what are we about here, they're very upfront about the fact that they actually submitted several of their programs, including Man Therapy, but also the U at college, at work, at whatever program, for evaluation in an RCT, which for those of you who don't know is considered like the gold standard of research. A randomized control trial, or an RCT, is one of the most effective ways that we can test the efficacy of something. It eliminates a lot of the possibility for bias and things like that, and like minimizes our margin for error. So they chose independently to submit their program to a study like this, which is rare in this field, notably companies like BetterHelp, Talkspace, what is the fucking other one? Cerebral. As far as I'm aware, they've never submitted their program to be evaluated in such a way, and they certainly haven't been forward or like very public about the results of that if they have. And so I thought that this was of note. For what it's worth, Man Therapy and the U program both demonstrated clinical efficacy in improving or like decreasing symptomatology rather, and decreasing the overall level of risk for suicidality. So that's usually what we're looking for when we're talking about referring, like in the clinical space, when we talk about referring clients out to community resources and stuff like that. It's important that we're doing our due diligence to not be sending our clients to places that are like unsafe or not demonstrated in the research. This is the core of the field that I work in, and it's really important that we talk about that because evidence-based practice is the way that we make sure that therapy is safe for folks. That said, generally, I'm not a fucking fan of the like obvious gendered way that we're presenting this material. I don't think that's probably a surprise to anybody who's been on this channel for any length of time. However, I do want to talk about this and tease out some nuance here. You guys might not like my answer to this. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I think like just stay with me because I think you might come to agree with me a little bit more after we talk about it. Again, I think it's clear that the obviously gendered and stereotyped way that we're presenting this material is not ideal. It's certainly not my favorite. However, I think there's a conversation to be had about how to reach hard to reach demographics. The like sort of typical like stereotype of like Gen X or boomer cis het man who's like maybe conservative or grew up in a time where men having emotions at all was like very much frowned upon and like not a part of the societal conversation. These people are typically a really hard to reach demographic in therapy because there's a lot of societal features getting in the way of reaching that demo. We also know from the research that the typical methods of advertising for mental health awareness, involvement, intervention, those things fall on deaf ears with this demographic. Have you ever seen the billboards about like, if you need help, call, blah, 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 or like, it's okay to not be okay, like those types of advertisements, that kind of rhetoric does not reach this fucking demo. We can demonstrate this clearly in the research. So while I'm not a fan of the obviously gendered material and I'm not a fan of upholding and perpetuating stereotypes, I do think there is some wisdom, honestly. Like there's like an innovative nature to choosing to present this material in a way that is tongue-in-cheek. It's like kind of funny. It's obviously exaggerated for the sake of being humorous, but also I think feels a lot safer to a demographic that typically is not going to engage with this type of material. If you notice too, a lot of the outward facing advertisement for this material shies away from the use of typical words that we associate with therapy, mental health, mental illness. I think probably in the goal of creating a sense of safety, creating a sense of comfort in this community before we like come right out and talk about the like nitty-gritty details of the subject. Like for example, on their homepage, it doesn't say like take our quiz or like get evaluated or like are you mentally ill. It says head inspection with this little headshot of Dr. Rich Mahogany and like little arrows that you can like get started, right? All of these are like, in my opinion, probably very carefully tailored to entice their target demo, which is somebody who's not typically interested or comfortable or at home in the world of like mental health evaluation and things like that. Also of note is that Man Therapy specifically does not provide therapy. This is not a digital psychotherapy service like BetterHelp or Talkspace. And so I have much less of a negative opinion of them for that. However, they did very much and do still very much partner with BetterHelp and Talkspace. I think probably others. So I don't think anybody is surprised that I'm not a fucking fan of that. Although I will give them the teeny tiniest of outs in this scenario, because I think especially, again, for this demographic, and because for a company that isn't, to my knowledge, directly owned by a psychotherapist, it's not surprising to me that they wouldn't know about all the issues. Clearly, BetterHelp is very committed to protecting their company image. And so I wouldn't be surprised if a company like this is maybe not quite as aware of all of the issues surrounding this. So again, not a big fan of that. But I do think that while it's not for me, it's not something that I would typically recommend, and I certainly am not handing out this resource, just unprompted. I do think that there is a space for this type of work to be done. Also of note in this area is the conversation about harm reduction. For those of you who are not familiar, harm reduction is, I think, more mainstream now, but still somewhat of an alternative approach to hard to treat issues. It's a very common approach in the addiction substance use world. For example, a needle exchange is a really common example of a harm reduction approach, because we are not intentionally trying to target folks or convince folks who aren't ready to acknowledge their addiction or substance use as a problem. We're not trying to force them to stop or trying to limit their access to substances necessarily, because the reality is that effectively we really just cannot. And so a needle exchange is intended to limit the amount of bloodborne illnesses that are being transmitted, the amount of harm that's coming to people, increasing an attitude of safety and transparency. And also, needle exchanges are typically located inside of clinics that also provide substance use or substance abuse disorder services. And so they're kind of coupled in that way, so that folks who develop this connection and community and sense of safety and non-judgmentalism in participating in the needle exchange program, if they do eventually one day come to the decision that the addiction is a problem, they have already that relationship built in to start those services. Very common example of harm reduction, because we're not the goal of the program is not to eliminate the substance abuse disorder, but it's to promote safety and to increase the odds that someone will not have a life-threatening issue, for example. I think Man Therapy kind of takes a similar approach in that a lot of their focus seems to be preventing suicide in this particular demographic. They talk a lot about how men are at a disproportionately high rate for, feels weird to call them successful. The clinical term is successful attempts. I don't super love this. Completed attempts, I guess, is a better word. They talk a lot about how men are at a disproportionate rate for completed attempts, which is something that we know from the research, by the way. Typically, this is about the means through which someone is attempting being more immediate and more lethal. There's a lot of nuances out there, but this video is not about that. But I think this approach seems to be kind of aimed at a harm reduction idea in terms of providing folks with resources and community and a sense of safety to eliminate that risk, which they've shown in their own research anyways that they're effective at doing. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about in regards to the harm reduction approach is that I think it's very easy for folks, especially folks who don't work in the field, to get sucked into this rhetoric that in order for folks to be healed, we have to be meeting certain milestones or be presenting certain types of characteristics or belonging to a certain demographic. I think this is worth unpacking, because this is common work that therapists are doing in individual work. We've talked on the channel before about the fallacy of doneness, and how a lot of folks, especially when you're new to therapy, can go in with the expectation that as soon as I complete X amount of sessions or do this amount of work, I will be a finished person who's fully done and all done growing, and I've fixed it, right? I've fixed myself, I've unfucked my shit. And that's not true. That's not real. The reality is that we will all continue to grow and evolve over the course of our lifetimes, and that new problems will crop up, old problems will crop up, things will change, things will morph, things will be different. And so we always have continual work to do. Not to say that you're never going to experience peace, because that's also not true. You can very much get to a place where you're experiencing peace and happiness and contentment, but just also honoring that you're a human, right? The nature is that you're going to grow and change. And so you will eventually need to kind of tap in and tap out of services throughout your lifetime, particularly for those of us who have childhood or chronic trauma. But again, neither here nor there. I think for folks, there is this idea that in order to benefit the most from therapy, you have to be a progressive person who is battling stigma and unlearning your privilege and is mental health positive and doing all of this deep inner personhood work, right? And we know that that's not true. It is, I think, ideal for folks to be unlearning a lot of those things, but the reality is simply that people will not. There will always be a portion of the world who does not identify with those ideas, and who, no matter how hard we try, are not going to hear or listen or be exposed or be in a place where they're ready to absorb that and to change. But it's not to say that those people, first of all, don't deserve to experience peace and happiness and joy and like healing from mental illness, but also can't be reached, right? Like just because you're a person who may like represent this stereotype of like Dr. Rich Mahogany doesn't mean that there isn't good work that can be done in therapy. I talk about this all the goddamn time on my channel, that there is a therapist for everyone, while my way of being tends to lend itself to folks like you, if you're here, I would assume, and that is like a comfy, easy, ideal demo for me. There are therapists who are nothing like me and who will vibe more with people like Dr. Rich Mahogany, people who are like in this kind of sector of the world. And so I think that, coupled with the idea that a lot of this material is being presented in this kind of tongue-in-cheek and humorous way, causes me to feel less vitriol, less like frustration for this type of content, because the reality is that they're serving a demo that, like, first of all, I don't serve, and so like that's great, we love that, but also that they're attempting to bridge a gap in services. For those of you who don't know, my education is in social work. Both my bachelor's and my master's degree are in social work, which has a heavy focus on community wellness, community development, changes, and like well-being throughout the lifespan. And I think resources like this are really valuable, because this to me reads very much as like sending this link to your dad or your uncle or your grandpa who like maybe doesn't super love the idea that you're in therapy, or like doesn't really understand what therapy is for, but like is maybe open to it, right? And so again, from that perspective, I don't hate this. I think there are very much flaws with this issue, especially when we talk about perpetuating gender stereotypes and how they're overall like a very harmful and potentially dangerous thing to be doing, especially when we talk about intimate partner violence. And so like that for me is a bit of an eyebrow raise, but again, I'm hesitant to really throw the book at somebody who is providing a resource and bridging this gap in the community. And especially when they're doing it from a clear place of wanting to provide evidence-based information and material, and they're not dabbling in the world of like direct one-on-one clinical psychotherapy, which also, for what it's worth, I perused through a lot of this material. A lot of it honestly is just like little short videos, short articles, things like that about particular subjects. They talk about sleep, they talk about anxiety, they talk about money and relationships and sex, and substance abuse, but they do also talk about intimate partner violence and LGBTQ issues. And on both fronts, they provide evidence-based information that's like progressive and affirming. There are, as far as I'm aware, I didn't scrub through the entire goddamn website because there's a lot of material here, but as far as I'm aware, they're not providing any material or any resources to institutions or like information that's not affirming or like safety promoting for the LGBTQ community and isn't like evidence-based in that regard. So generally, to like sum it up, do I love man therapy? No, it's not really my thing, but I don't really have any beef here, to be perfectly honest. I don't think it's the worst. I am like very much open to feedback about it. If y'all have different experiences, I would love to know if anyone has personal experiences with man therapy, what that has looked like. But from a clinician's perspective, just looking through the website and looking at the material they offer, I don't hate it, which I know probably is gonna push some of your guys' buttons, but like from the lens of analyzing it clinically, I'm just gonna leave man therapy alone. I think that is like a fair place to stop for today. Like I said, I would love to know if you guys have thoughts or feelings, or if you have personal experience with man therapy. Please let me know, because I'm very curious. But generally, if you like the video, subscribe to the channel. We make content like this in a cute pop culture moment every now and again, so I'd love to have you stay. And share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow. And I will see you guys next time. Okay.